So, hello and welcome to everybody, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us for our Metropolitan Study Group meeting of May 2026. No, 25. I'm a year ahead. 2025. So today we have Dr. David Harrison, whose paper is entitled Wilmshurst, Waite and Crowley and the Third Inkling. That is correct, isn't it, David?
Certainly is, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So I will, with great pleasure, hand over to you, Dr. David Harrison. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'd just like to do a short intro to the paper, if I may. It all started at Christmas when I was given this beautiful book of the Oxford Book of English Mystical Verse from 1917, and in there was poetry by Wilmshurst, Waite, and Crowley, and amongst other poets as well of the mystical persuasion. It really is a beautiful book, and I know that books by all three of those writers, especially Crowley, for example, they run into the thousands now. If you go into eBay, thousands of pounds, for a Crowley original. For Waite, hundreds, maybe even touching thousands now, and Wilmshurst as well. So, but this apparently was a £5 from eBay. So it's a beautiful book and contemporary to those three authors as well. And when I dug a bit deeper into this, there's a fascinating story behind it, which is what the paper is about today. So without further ado, I shall start and be open for questions afterwards as well. So Walter Leslie Wilmshurst, Arthur Edward Waite, Aleister Crowley, and the Third Inkling. So the Oxford Book of English Mystical Verse was first published in 1917 and stands as an excellent anthology of esoterically themed poetry from the period, which included poetry with overt hints of the supernatural, Arthurian legend, Christian mysticism, the occult, and hints of Freemasonry, which mainly delved into the initiatic experience, hidden knowledge, and the search for the divine. Walter Leslie Wilmshurst and Arthur Edward Waite were the standout contemporary esoteric Freemasons in the long list of authors that had contributed to the collection. Though Aleister Crowley, who had also contributed 3 poems to the anthology, also had Masonic connections, albeit connections that existed on the outer fringes of regular Freemasonry. Other authors who appeared in the collection who had been prominent Freemasons included Alexander Pope and Oscar Wilde, though these were posthumous contributions. Poetry by William Butler Yeats also appeared, and Yeats being a prominent member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, who had known both Waite and Crowley. The publication of poetry in the Oxford Book of Verse series by these key members of the later occult revival certainly suggests poetical work of a high standard. Indeed, Daniel Howard Sinclair Nicholson, one of the 2 editors of the anthology, who had chosen the poems, was somewhat interested in mysticism and moved within occult circles. Nicholson had published various works that had resonated certain esoteric and occult themes, his works venturing into Christian mysticism, sex magic, and divulging into ideas of alchemy and spiritualism. Nicholson was a close friend of the Third Inkling, Charles Williams, who, along with the Reverend A.H.E. Lee, formed an occult discussion group that met regularly at Lee's Vicarage in London from around 1919 to explore spiritual matters. Nicholson died in 1936, and after Williams left London for Oxford in 1939, the meetings came to an end. These meetings were very much reminiscent of John Yarker's Society of Eight, which existed around 30 years before, being a smaller but equally important meeting of like-minded, intelligent men who held a desire to discuss and explore ideas of the occult. Nicholson had published his own collection of esoterically themed poetry in 1913, some having a mystical religious overtone, such as the poem The Vigil of St. Joseph Assisi, while others, such as To the Dancing Faun, held more mythical and traditional themes. Nicholson went on to continue the mystical religious theme with a work entitled The Mysticism of St. Francis of Assisi in 1923. Perhaps his most successful work, however, was his novel, The Marriage Craft. The work putting forward ideas of sex, with some ideas drifting into more spiritual areas, especially with the notion of transmutation. 3 of the characters in the novel were based on Nicholson himself and his friends Charles Williams and the Reverend Lee. And as the premise of the novel is based entirely on discussion amongst a group of people, one can glimpse, albeit briefly, in what the discussions in Lee's vicarage were like. The novel, when reviewed in The Spectator in September 1924, was somewhat praised for its boldness, and it still stands up today for its modern approach to writing. The Reverend A.H.E. Lee was the second editor of the anthology, and it has been suggested that Lee presented Williams and Nicholson with certain esoteric rituals, and it has been put forward that Lee was a member of the Stella Mattutitana, a Golden Dawn splinter group. Lee also contributed to some Christian works, the works sometimes being ever so slightly controversial in their approach, such as his introduction to Geraldine Cummings' The Childhood of Jesus. Charles Williams was an editor at the Oxford University Press and had keen esoteric leanings. He had been involved in Waite's Fellowship of the Rosy Cross, being a member of the Salvator Mundi Temple, and it was this background as editor and as an esotericist, combined with his deep his deep friendship with Nicholson and Lee, that probably assisted in his publication of the anthology with the Oxford University Press. Williams was also a popular novelist, his work reflecting his interest in the supernatural and the spiritual. Like his fellow Inklings, J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, Williams wrote fantasy novels, though his stories were firmly set in the contemporary world. Much has been written on the Inklings. They were an Oxford-based literary discussion group led by J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. Other significant members of the group included Charles Williams, who had corresponded with Lewis from an early stage, both of the writers having congratulated each other on their early works. The group championed the fantasy genre and the use of narrative, and the readings appeared to have garnered constructive criticism and support for each other's work. They met at various locations, such as University College and the University of Oxford, and later at Magdalen College, and in some of Oxford pubs, most famously The Eagle and Child. Some of the novels first read at the meetings included Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, Lewis's Out of the Silent Planet, and Williams' All Hallows Eve. All of these works have, of course, become classics today. So we now come on to the poetry of Wilmshurst, Waite, and Crowley in the anthology. Wilmshurst, a solicitor, was initiated into Huddersfield Lodge number 290 in West Yorkshire, before founding the esoterically flavoured Lodge of Living Stones number 4957 in 1927, which still meets in Leeds today. Wilmshurst was a supporter of Waite's works, writing reviews for his books, and also wrote articles for the Occult Review, as well as writing his own books with topics ranging from Christian mysticism, Orientalism, and esoteric meanings within Freemasonry. Wilmshurst's Masonic work put forward the emphasis of finding the centre, which was to find the divine spark within us. This idea was presented in his poem, The Mystery of Light, a work of esoteric splendour that set the scene of hidden mysteries and acted as a poetical guide on how to find the centre. And this is an excerpt from this particular poem, The Mystery of Light, which, by the way, is perhaps Wilmshurst's most popular and famous poem. So watch the thronging angels pass to a high celestial mass. See a veiled flaming centre. See a great high priest there enter. Whence a host he lifteth up, and a crimson brimming cup, which he bids all eat and sup. Arthur Edward Waite had immersed himself in Christian mysticism, embracing the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn before founding the Fellowship of the Rosy Cross. He had dabbled with Martinism, was initiated into Runnymede Lodge number 2430 in 1901, entered into a number of high degrees, and wrote many books on esoteric, Masonic, and occult traditions, such as the Book of Ceremonial Magic in 1913, and his new Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, which was published in 1921. In his poem, The Morality of the Lost Word, which features in the anthology, Waite ventures directly into themes of Freemasonry and Christian mysticism, and touches on a similar theme to which Wilmshurst conveyed in his own version of esoteric Freemasonry, especially with the search for the centre, putting forward that the spirit within is the long lost word. So interestingly, a poem by an anonymous author in the anthology is entitled A Ballad of the Centre, and again suggests that the divine is within us. And this is a little quote from that poem. Thou inmost God, to whom aspire. And the same poem also expresses a common theme that runs through the poems of Wilmshurst, Waite, and Crowley, that of the hidden secrets behind the veil and the movement away from darkness to light. And this is another quotation. Into the darkness unafraid, wherein soft hands of silence lay, the veil of peace upon the blade of too bright thought, we take our way. And Aleister Crowley was the most controversial of the three in regards to his lifestyle, which mainly concerned a well-publicised indulgence in fringe Freemasonry and sex magic, and was certainly well known in occult circles. He was certainly as qualified as Wilmshurst and Waite in regards to poetry, having numerous poetry collections published, such as White Stains in 1898 and The Winged Beetle in 1910. Crowley had by this time entered into what was to become known as fringe Freemason. He was initiated into an irregular Scottish Rite Lodge in Mexico, was a member of the unrecognised Anglo-Saxon Lodge number 343 in Paris, and had become involved in John Yarker's Ancient and Primitive book, becoming Grand Hierophant for a time after Yarker's death. Crowley's poetic offerings were thus as equally enigmatic and esoteric, with the Masonically themed The Rose and the Cross, and his poem on initiation into the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, entitled The Neophyte, which, like the aforementioned Wilmshurst poem, discusses the secrets behind the veil in the inner temple. And this is another quote. I feel the spring, the all-devouring dawn, rush with my rising. There, beyond the goal, the veil is rent. Yes, let the veil be drawn. In this sense, Freemasonry appears to have been a gateway in the search for a deeper esoteric understanding of Wilmshurst, Waite, and Crowley, all of whom saw the craft as a means to discover hidden knowledge and to transform oneself, and to ultimately search for the divine within. Wilmshurst, for example, stated that the first degree ceremony used on the reception of a candidate into the craft is designed to introduce him to the first stage of a system of knowledge and self-discipline, which, if faithfully followed up and lived out in his personal life, will clarify and transform his mind from its natural state of darkness to one of light. This would set the new Mason on a quest for the centre, and the initiate being guided by Wilmshurst teachings. Waite, in a similar form, saw Freemasonry as a gateway that revealed hidden knowledge. Craft Masonry signifies a quest for that which was lost, like the word in Kabbalism, for that which is being hidden, like the holy vessel of the Grail, for that which is communicated by God, like the mystic stone of alchemy. And that was from his secret tradition in Freemasonry. Crowley the magician also saw Freemasonry with interest, especially the third degree. And this is a quote from his book Magic. A magical ceremony constructed on this formula is thus in close essential harmony with a natural mystic process. We find it the basis of many important initiations, notably the third degree in Masonry and the 5th to 6th degree ceremony of the Golden Dawn. The essence of it consists of robing yourself as a king and then stripping and slaying yourself and rising from that death to the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. Indeed, after forming a friendship with the aforementioned John Yarker, Crowley managed to obtain the rituals for the ancient and primitive rite, which he subsequently used in the reconstruction of his Ordo Templi Orientis. So, to conclude, the Oxford Book of English Mystical Verse was certainly the most esoteric of ventures in regards to the Oxford Anthology series. And as a product of Nicholson and Lee, who held a deep interest in mysticism, it cannot be ruled out that their close friend Charles Williams, an editor at the Oxford University Press at the time, who also held an interest in esoteric matters, lent a helping hand in their work. The timing of the publication of the work in 1917, during World War I, is also worth noting, as the period saw the rise in popularity of spiritualism and the interest in mysticism, due to the many deaths of sons and husbands caused during the war. This wartime occult phenomena was fueled by publications of occult works such as The Angels of Mons by Arthur Machen in 1915. Machen being a writer of occult fiction, and as it happens, a friend of none other than Arthur Edward Waite. And of course, they worked together on various different projects. The Angels of Mons were reputably sighted by an officer as a large body of horsemen that suddenly vanished during the retreat of Mons. And this interest in wartime spiritualism was championed by another Freemason, the author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And a renewed interest in the esoteric and mystical beliefs went hand in hand with it. Thus, this particular anthology was published and found an audience, and it allowed the likes of Wilmshurst, Waite, and Crowley to find a larger and more popular reception for their poetry. Freemasonry, the themes of which were embedded in their verse, was a gateway that offered endless esoteric explorations for these three men. And indeed, the poetry displayed in the anthology by Wilmshurst, Waite, and Crowley certainly explored elements of initiation, hidden knowledge, and the esoteric nature. So, thank you very much. And I'll pass it to the group for any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, David. And we have a question already from, I think the person's name is James. Let me just double check. Just give me a moment, please. Yes, this is from James, who's joining us from Texas. And his question is, for the presenter, I have difficulty understanding how Aleister Crowley could have any positive impact on the so-called Christian mysticism. Additionally, he seemed to prey on young, vulnerable young women, and he even fathered a son at the age of 61 by a 19-year-old girl. That son was Randall Baer, Bair, who died as recently as 2002 and was said to suffer from schizophrenia. I would almost bet his father did too. What are your thoughts on the mental illness aspect of father and son? And can you define inkling? Thank you.
Right. What should I deal with, Crowley first, or
Yeah.
yeah, Crowley first, right? Yeah, I think the son that he's mentioning there was I think he changed his name, didn't he? And he was living in Cornwall. Is that the one? And he founded the this kind of political movement, this kind of um British neo kind of right wing movement thing. And yeah, he did have, if it's the same one, I can't remember the name that he gave himself, but he did suffer from schizophrenia, I believe, and died homeless. I think that's the same son. Um, but yeah, I'm not sure about Crowley's uh, mental illness state really. I mean, that's probably something that biographies of Crowley could talk about
Mm.
in some respect. But I think at the time, um, what you have with Crowley and what's been publicized about him, in his many biographies. Richard Kaczynski, I think, is probably my favorite biography of Crowley. Although Tobias Churton's done quite a few different stages of his life, which are quite good. Crowley basically was like a sponge that soaked up anything that could that he could adapt and shape to his view, really. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Crowley or the OTO, although I've obviously looked into it and done a bit of research on it, and especially in relation to John Yarker, because I wrote the biography of John Yarker, which I believe is available at the Lewis Masonic stand at the High Council. But yeah, Crowley just soaked anything up that he could, and he was obviously involved in the Golden Dawn for a time, which again is well written about. He was attached to John Yarker. He became John Yarker's loose heir, really, and inherited quite a good status in the ancient and primitive rite for a time. And also he was very much into the Orientalism of the period as well, so he was still like an essential figure. Crowley's someone that you can't ignore, really. When you delve into the occult revival, you can't just ignore Crowley, and say, oh yeah, bad guy, oh let's put him over there. As a historian, you delve into stuff which is both good and possibly bad, and maybe a bit in between. And you try and give a full picture of the full landscape, and in this respect, we're talking about the occult revival. We're talking about many figures, and we're in the later stages of the occult revival here. We're in the early 20th century, and so Crowley managed to get poetry in the Oxford Book of English Mystical Verse, and that's why I've mentioned him. So as a historian, you just can't ignore people, because they're they've done good stuff, bad stuff, whatever. You've got to kind of look at the whole landscape, the whole historical landscape, and find out exactly what was going on and interpret that. So that's my reasons behind discussing Crowley.
Okay.
Which, I'm not a fan, but I do find it fascinating that someone like Crowley could get involved um, in fringe Freemasonry and adapt certain elements of fringe Freemasonry and take it in a completely different direction. What he did in his personal life, it's another story, for another paper that probably will be given at some point by somebody else. But what was the other part of the question?
The other part of the question is, could you define inkling? And I'm also
Inkling.
curious
Oh,
about
the Inklings. Yeah, yeah.
the use of the third inkling. What do you mean by the third inkling?
Oh well, Charles Williams was the third Inkling. I've mentioned that
Yeah,
in the
I
paper.
heard you say
Yeah.
that, but I still don't understand what that means. Is that
The
inkling?
Ink. Oh yeah.
Was
I
that a
did.
name that he took for himself? And
Oh no, it was a
if so,
group.
why?
It was a group. I mentioned it in the paper.
Yeah.
There's a paragraph here that I'll read again. Much has been written on the Inklings. Now the Inklings were a loose group, if you like. They were part social group,
Oh,
part
yes.
book reviewers, if you like,
Okay.
and Oxford discussion group. And they were they were an Oxford-based literary discussion group led by J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis.
Mm,
Now, Tolkien and Lewis, of course, giants of the literary world, absolute giants. I mean, you've probably seen the films. Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
mm,
Um, it's the Lord of the Rings. Fantastic novels. So I'm sure you're all familiar with
mm,
those anyway. Um, the lesser known member of that group was Charles Williams, and he is known as the third Inkling.
mm,
So Tolkien, Williams, Tolkien, Lewis, the first and second, if you like. Charles Williams was the third, and Williams himself, not as famous as Tolkien and Lewis, but still a giant, really, in that kind of fantasy, early 20th century fantasy genre.
mm,
Um, and I mentioned his book, All Hallows Eve, which I don't know if anyone's familiar with that one, but it is an absolute classic.
mm,
So Charles Williams was the third Inkling,
mm,
the third Inkling in the title, and he was the one, as explained in the paper, that was working for the the Oxford University Press, and was
mm.
probably behind um, this this book, because he was a very close friend of the editors.
Mm.
So this is how this book came to be about. And obviously, as I mentioned in the conclusion, it had an audience because they felt in the air that spiritualism and esoteric ideas were popular due to the First World War.
Wonderful. Thank you for clarifying that, David. And Benny, you have your hand up. Over to you, Benny.
Thank you very much. After this quite a negative evaluation from James about Crowley, I felt that I had to defend him a little. And it's not that I know so much about his person, because I mean he died before I was born, so I couldn't have known him. But I think that, for example, his tarot deck is quite extraordinary, and it still is one of the most used and valued tarot decks in the world. And of course he didn't make the artwork himself, but I mean he was like the brain behind the ideas of this tarot deck. Also, I know one of the representatives of the OTO in America, Lon Milo Duquette, who is a very skilled author, and a very serious, also a very serious Freemason. And I think if I read, for example, his book on Crowley's tarot, I think it makes very good sense. And of course, I agree that Crowley cannot be considered to be a supporter of Christian mysticism, because he more or less founded his own religion. You know, he had this experience in Egypt and had this revelation of his book of the law and all this concept connected with it. And you might find that crazy in some way, but it also has a lot of originality. And also, I think there was a clear reaction against like Victorian England and all this kind of very stiff morality concepts. And in some way, he was like a revolutionary. And sometimes this get out of control or it's getting too much. But I'm sure if he had been living today, there was a lot of the present world that he would probably fit more into than the time he was living in many ways. And I think he's a great artist and a very original figure, but I'm also aware of his dark sides, of course. What do you think?
Yeah. That's quite a good analogy, really. Yeah, I mean, Crowley's always been controversial and you know, and he always will be. You know, it's interesting that the guy from Texas, was it, that mentioned his son. Someone was writing a paper on his son that I met a couple of years ago. I'm not sure what happened to it. He was researching about his son.
Okay.
And yeah, he lived in Cornwall somewhere, and rented out a castle or something. You know, I can't remember now. Might be going off on a tangent here, but yeah, very, very interesting. And in the 70s and 80s, you know, he had this kind of political movement going on, and he had a driver. I think he rented a limousine or something like that, and he had a driver that drove him all the way to London, so he could present Harold Wilson with some ideas for politics and things like that. So
Okay.
very, very strange. But yeah, you know, yeah, Crowley, very, very kind of dominant figure in the occult world. And as you quite rightly say, Benny, you know, if he was around today, it'd be a different story, I'm sure. You know, it's just that at that particular time, you know, it was very, very controversial and you know, very kind of risque. So, but yeah, when you put Crowley in a paper, for example, you know, that becomes the discussion, and you lose everything else then, you know. So there's always a danger of that, you know.
Yeah.
But on the other side, it's a popular discussion, you know.
Yeah.
It's a very lively discussion, which is what a paper's supposed to stir in people, you know. So yeah, that's you know, a good analogy, really. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and greetings from Copenhagen.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Benny.
Yeah,
and Brig, you have your hand up. Over to you, Brig. Are you there, Brig?
Needs to unmute.
Yeah.
Right, I'll try again. Thank you, David. Many thanks for a very thought-provoking presentation. Could I applaud and condone Benny's views on Crowley, and perhaps at the risk of repetition, I've said a number of times on these presentations with the greatest respect, I don't think we should be diverted or even influenced on the private lives or the morality of the messengers. Let us concentrate on their message. And for argument's sake, you mentioned David Tolkien, who was a giant when it came to the knowledge of the Nordic tradition. And we could perhaps criticise Waite and Wilmshurst in their specific esoteric interpretation via the Christian tradition, but I don't think we should. It was their chosen tradition. So let's look at the universal message that permeates through, because the bottom line is all these characters had a major contribution to esoteric thought, and with the greatest of respect, let's forget their personalities, consider that message. So would you agree that we should concentrate on the message as opposed to the messenger?
Yeah, I think yeah, that's quite right, that Brig, really, because one of the things that we discuss with these papers is the more professional elements, the work that they actually did. In this case, it's poetry, and you know, each one of those writers, you can call them writers for now, they wrote numerous material, books, pamphlets, whatever you want to call them, journals, papers, whatever, poetry. So there's, as you said, there was this message. They were writing about their belief system in a way, you know, and you know, for someone like Waite and Wilmshurst, it definitely was a more Christian mysticism element, you know, to their work, and that filtered in. Crowley, as I mentioned before, like a sponge, soaking up everything he could, and it all goes into this one message, you know. And as you said, you know, that's what it's about. They're messengers, you know, and they're pouring forward their ideas. And in this case, you know, it's the later occult revival. Unlike its earlier stages in the 19th century, where you have Yarker and Mackenzie and Irwin and people like that, Cox and the likes, William Quilliam, and you know, there's a big group of them really that were all involved in those specific orders and Orientalism, and by the time you get to the later occult revival, you've got the First World War. And the First World War is this event, this seismic event that shatters people's views on you know, the social economic system and empire and everything, you know. But amongst that, this poetry book comes out, and this symbolizes the renewed interest in spiritualism and esoteric thought, for reasons that were happening in that First World War. And again, these people find, these messengers, as Brig put it, find a voice and find a platform. And this is what this anthology is about. You know, it's a platform for the likes of Wilmshurst, Waite and Crowley. And it's not just any platform. It's not an independent publication. It's not you know, some kind of small time publication, local publication. It is an Oxford University publication. You know, it's the Oxford Book of English mystical verse, you know, and this series at the time was immensely popular. You know, it was a massive series, you know, and you can find these books online, you can find them. There's a whole collection of them, you know. But in this specific one, it's about mystic verse. And it's done at a time in 1917 towards the end of the First World War. And as Brigg puts it, quite nicely puts it, these messengers have this fantastic platform, and that's it, you know, and it's popular. And reading it today, it's still relevant, you know. So yeah, that's quite right. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and of course we mustn't forget that one of the main promoters of spiritualism during the Second World War was Air Marshal Dowding, and perhaps his views didn't resonate on the hierarchy in Westminster, which probably it was why he didn't get the recognition for his war service. But he claimed that these deceased pilots spoke to him literally on a daily basis. So even that contribution itself, as you mentioned, both world wars contributed to our inquiry into matters that go bump in the night.
Yeah, it's good. It's good that you've mentioned that, because you've all probably heard of Michael Benteen,
Yeah,
who was one of the goons.
the Bumblies.
Yeah, Spike Milligan and you know, Peter Sellers and the crowd.
Yeah,
Harry Seacombe, he was one of them, wasn't he? But Michael Benteen, I can remember Michael Benteen in the 70s. It's potty time, you know, and you know, as a kid in the 70s. But he wrote an autobiography. I can't remember when now. But it was something that I read years ago, and immediately I found fascinating that he had this kind of spiritual episode, if we can call it that, during his time in the Second World War, and he could recognize if a soldier or an airman was going to die, because I'm working off memory now, but he saw this kind of darkness and this skull-like feature in the faces. And when he saw that, he knew that these servicemen were going to die, you know. And he writes about this quite clearly in his
yes.
in his memoir. I don't know if anyone's ever read this, but it's fascinating. Again, during wartime, you know, we get this, you know, the whole population suffering, you know, stress and anxiety and disruption, and then not to mention, of course, you know, the servicemen who were fighting on the front line, fighting in the war, you know, the stress that they feel. And you know, with Michael Benteen, it seems to have brought out this level of insight, if you like, this spiritual insight. And yeah, you know, it's fascinating. So if anybody ever wants to check that out, Michael Benteen's memoirs or autobiography,
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. Many thanks, David.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brig. And I have a question for you, David. The Oxford Book of Mystical English Verse, you say, does that book contain any of William Blake's work?
It certainly does. Yeah.
I was going to say, if it didn't, it should.
Yeah.
With a title like
I
that.
was reading some before. Yeah. I mean, it's got everyone you can think of that has written some kind of esoteric kind of poem.
Yes.
Yeah, here's the Blake. Yeah, we've got From Jerusalem, an extract from
Yes.
Jerusalem. The Excursion. Oh no, sorry, that's William Wordsworth. He appears as well. The Everlasting Gospel. If anyone's ever familiar with that one. Um, what else have we got? Yeah, that's quite a long one. I mean, Blake, even though he wasn't a Freemason, he certainly was aware of Freemasonry, and of course he was what's the correct term? He was speaking with, or having experiences with angels and
Yes.
all kinds of divine beings and
Mm.
all manner of kind of entities, and it's a fascinating story with Blake, absolutely fascinating. And he was writing all this fantastic, beautiful poetry about dark satanic mills and the tiger and things like that. Fantastic stuff. So yeah, he was definitely a conduit,
Mm.
for this kind of material.
Yes.
So yeah, he's in there.
Great.
Which is great. To see all these kind of esoteric writers together.
Mm.
In one place.
Yeah. Blake, he wrote a book when he was 32 that I first read when I was 32, called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And I really recommend that. It's not a very long book, but it's very thought-provoking. And in that, he turns upside down the common archetype of the angel and the devil. So the angel archetype seeks to restrict free-flowing, creative, and passionate energy. And it's very, very thought-provoking. Especially, there's a short chapter called The Proverbs of Hell. And at the beginning of that, he introduces it by saying, "One day I found myself wandering amidst the fires of hell." And so I thought to myself, just as when a person is in a foreign land, that each land contains its own inherent wisdom, therefore I sought to compile the Proverbs of Hell. Now, what wisdom does hell contain? And they're fierce, they're short, one-line things. And they're very, 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 very thought-provoking and beautiful. Like one of them being, just as the butterfly lays her eggs on the fairest of leaves, so the priest lays his curse on the fairest of joys. Very, very strong.
Yeah. Very, very profound.
Yeah, absolutely.
That in a way brings us to that first question about Crowley.
Yeah.
What wisdom can you find in hell? What wisdom can you find from Crowley? For example, that kind of thing. It's
I think for me there's a strong difference between the two, because in spite of the fact that Blake in that book switched upside down those common archetypes of the angel and the devil, he was a very, very God-fearing and God-loving person. And he knew which side his bread was buttered, if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah. Even though he was like, obviously he suffered from a form of depression
Yes.
and probably like a bipolar. I mean, I'm no psychologist or medical guy, but it appears to me that there was something like that going on.
Yes.
Because he certainly suffered from a depressive or depressive episodes, and these kind of divine experiences that he had.
I do suspect that during the time he was alive, that to write in the way that he did and to create the images that he did in his art so unusual that he may well have felt extremely lonely and misunderstood.
Yeah,
that can have a very strong effect on a person's emotional and mental well-being, to feel isolated and harshly judged or criticized or misunderstood.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. I mean, if you look at all these poets, well, not all of them, but most of them, the when you look into their personal lives, for example, there's some kind of flaws and kind of issues, kind of bubbling underneath the surface there.
Yeah.
That drives this kind of search for the more spiritual elements.
Yeah. I think it's something that many of us can relate to. At times in our lives, we've all been through periods of suffering of one kind or another. And it's through those experiences that, depending on the work that we're prepared to do upon ourselves, in the interior work, those trials and tribulations and challenges become the very things that help us to understand more deeply some of the mysteries of life.
Yeah, it's true. And again, during the war, both world wars, but in this case, the First World War, that kind of overwhelming sense of loss.
Absolutely.
That people were suffering. The sons had died, the husbands had died. And sometimes, they never saw, never had a chance of a burial. They never saw the body or, whatever, they just lost. And, and that overwhelming sense of despair and loss. And at the same time, we get this kind of rise, this interest in spiritualism and esoteric ideas again. And it was like a big, kind of upsurge of interest, and very powerful, profound poetry, can really hit home and make someone feel comfortable in a sense, that there might be something else. And they might see the loved ones again, or might feel the loved ones again.
Absolutely. Yeah. We have Frater Alma, who's just posted in the chat a starting place for the text up for discussion. Thanks for bringing it to our awareness today. And he's got an archive.org link in the chat that people might want to copy and paste and follow. And I think that might be, although I haven't checked, but it might well be to the book that your paper.
It is available online. Yeah, there is an online source where it's free to to download.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So 1 second, please. We have Benny. You've got your hand up again. Over to you, Benny.
Thank you very much. Speaking about these difficult times, I came to think of the Corona virus time, where everything was closed down and people became very lonely. And we actually have this wonderful opportunity of meeting online. I mean, this kind of meeting we are having right now is in great measure, due to the isolation of the Corona time. I think it became very popular to have these meetings, online, with each other. So something good came out of it, I can say. But my question was, are there any female authors in this anthology, like Diane Fortune or somebody else representing, mysticism from a female side?
Yeah, there is. As you said, that the page just opened on a Nora Chesson. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Nora Chesson. I am the spirit of all that lives, labours and losses, and forgives. My breath's the wind among the reeds. I'm wounded when a birch tree bleeds. So beautiful stuff there. Yeah. There's some female writers in here. Loads of familiar writers. From Matthew Arnold. There's Emily Bronte as well. Emily Bronte. Perhaps the more famous writer there, female writer that you may have heard of. Yeah, there's quite a few popular writers. Yeah, it's a very nice collection, and you know, I got it during the Christmas period, and cold winter's nights, you know, that kind of thing, you know. Great read, you know, on a cold dark night, you know. But yeah, it's one of those things, and the paper sprang from it, really, you know. Just you know, wrote it, you know, in a day or so, really, you know. Yeah, I thought, you know, it's a fascinating kind of platform for these writers, and the involvement of the third Inkling, you know, Charles Williams, you know, to be involved and connected to the editors there, who were also authors, and this kind of little group that they formed, you know, and they met in London, in a London vicarage of all places. Howard, yeah, Daniel Howard Sinclair Nicholson, A.H.E. Lee, and Charles Williams, you know, very, you know, kind of almost forgotten about now, really, you know. And Charles Williams has become, you know, this kind of third Inkling, but really it was connected to, you know, various different esoteric groups and things, and you know, so he was there in the middle of it. Lesser known writer, and ranked the third Inkling, but you know, still quite powerful in a way. And you know, he's written some fantastic work. Not as famous as Tolkien and Lewis, of course, but nonetheless, you know, very important.
Wonderful.
Thanks once again, Benny. Brig, over to you once again.
Thank you, Shane. David, I just want to take up on Shane's excellent point, which I think is very valid. It could be argued strongly that all the people that you've mentioned, including the dear souls that are attending this particular presentation, I'm sure most of us, if not all, have had the experience of feeling like round pegs in square holes, or something like that. Benny's comment, I think, is very relevant, where when he talked about the bringing of us together during the pandemic. Okay, we're lucky enough to have now this facility for bringing us all together, and I would just hope, David, that it does bring some sort of comfort to those of us that had the experience of being round pegs in square holes.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, one of the things about the COVID period is yourself and Benny have mentioned, was these online platforms, really, where you know, we could get together, present a paper, and there was many of these at the time. You know, I can remember doing the full rounds of these. I was I mean, I've presented a paper here before, and there was the is it the Super Ode group, and there was a few other Grand Lodges that did their own thing as well. Few smaller groups, and it was great, you know, because you could just kind of get together. People could come together, and you know, kind of just feel part of something again, you know, because yeah, it was quite a strange, isolated time, really, you know. and so it was great that these kind of get-togethers, you know, kind of occurred, really, you know. I can
Yeah.
remember doing one for a Mexican Grand Lodge. That was a good one. I think none of them spoke English very well, but it was great, you know. And they had music. They all got together and did a kind of sing along, you know, and you know, there was a few kind of violins going on and things, and it was great how it all kind of the timing of it was perfect.
And perhaps, David, language is no barrier to our universal intent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, that's probably my most memorable kind of online talk, actually, the Mexican one. And yeah, it was great.
Yeah, many thanks.
Thanks very much, Brig. Peter, over to you, Peter. Thanks for your patience. You've had your hand up for a while. So over to you, Peter. Are you there, Peter? I'm not sure. You may need to unmute your microphone, but I can't see you there now, Peter. For some reason, you've disappeared off of the list of people with their hands up. Let's just check. Yeah, I've got you down as Peter's Galaxy tab. If you're there, Peter, please feel free, unmute yourself and go ahead. Unless that was maybe you hit the hand up button by mistake, I don't know. Does anyone else have any particular questions for David? Well, I have a question to put into the air in general. So obviously by the collection of authors of poetic works that are mystically inclined, and if we look at Jalaluddin Rumi as well as another mystical poet, what do you think it is about the medium of poetry that catalyzes the desire to write in that particular way in those people who are obviously dedicated mystics?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question, really, because it's I could give a long answer on that one. One of the things with poetry, of course, is that it's used throughout history as a means of conveying the message, really, as Brig put it, I think. If you go back to the say, for example, the Welsh bards of the medieval period, during the age of the princes in Wales, you know, the medieval period, you know, 1100s, 1200s, that kind of period. The Welsh bards had this fantastic Welsh poetry that had this unique what's the word, iambic pentameter, maybe, this unique structure to it, and that was obviously their means of conveying a spiritual message and tapping into the, you know, the Welsh heroic psyche, if you like, and the spiritualism of the Welsh, and also with Shakespeare, for example. I mean, Shakespeare's you know, the poetical elements, you know, that he used as well, you know, very strong, very, very powerful. The rhyming schemes, you know, the assonance, you know, the use of three, for example, is something that's important in poetry and quite powerful, used by politicians still to this day. the use of three, stop the boats and that kind of stuff, and stuff like that, spend, all this kind of stuff, that so very powerful, all these poetical elements, have a certain power to them, and are ideal for conveying, political messages, spiritual messages, and indeed, in the, say, Masonic ritual, for example, there's elements there, there's poetical elements there that help you to remember parts of the ritual, and again, when it's orated perfectly, there's an element of power there. So I think with poetry, rhyming schemes and all kinds of iambic pentameter and all the other poetical elements, it really does lend itself to kind of this sense of power and directing this message, which I think is embedded in us, from generations, going way back in history, the use of poetry, in various different languages, in Greek and Albanian and French as well, Italian, beautiful kind of poetry that is used throughout history, to convey messages. So I think that's why, poetry was very popular at this time as well, and in the 18th and 19th century, early 20th century. Seems to kind of tail off now, but I think it had a bit of a revival in the 60s, kind of tied up with the beat poets, of the 50s and 60s. And again, you get that sense of power, from the beat poets, the really profound, powerful poetry. Even Jim Morrison of the Doors, he did some great poetry. Very basic stuff, but very powerful, with that message in the 60s, with revolution and desire for change. What do you think? Because you're obviously, you like Blake, for example, and
You're muted, Shane.
oh yeah, you're muted. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't remember I was muted. It is a very difficult question to address, but I think it's it allows the imagination to express itself in an artistic way, and I think that the artistic imagination is somehow closely connected to mystical experience or mystical perception. And I do believe there is a strong distinction between the imagination in its basest form and true or genuine mystical experience or mystical understanding or perception. But I do think that the art in general, artistic mediums, they allow for the imagination to find ways to express itself. And maybe that's got something to do with it. It's a very speculative question, but I think that when on occasion we have those kind of mystical dreams, those dreams that are not normal dreams, but they brand themselves on the memory, that they seem to come from somewhere else, and once we've had the dream, we never forget it. We'll remember that dream as long as we live. That those are closely linked with, I believe, kind of spiritual contact and communication from the spiritual realms more directly to the individual. And I think that the artistic mediums lend themselves to expressing those experiences or that understanding or those perceptions maybe more freely than in normal speech or in through sound. I know as I'm a musician, and through playing music, I feel that I can express feelings and emotions that I can't express quite as well in any other medium, in any other way, not through words, but through music. It's a different thing. And I'm sure that great, art is often inspired by spiritual insight that channels itself through the individual into the artwork that they produce.
Yeah. You often, like, I'm a musician as well, and I played in bands and
Yeah.
90s and early 2000s, and recorded and things, and I met quite a few kind of famous musicians, and one of them was a member of the Lars. I don't know if you remember the Lars in the early 90s, Liverpool band. Did a fantastic first album and then disappeared. But one of them that I got talking to, he wrote songs, and he described himself as a conduit, as a
Yes.
a kind of like a phone line from wherever, the universe or wherever, and it was coming, and these songs were just coming out of him. He was self-taught, did bad at school, wasn't great in school, wasn't a great writer, didn't really bother with his O levels or whatever, that kind of thing. Yet here he was writing these beautiful songs, so yeah, I agree with that, really. Yes.
Ishmael, thanks very much for your patience. Over to you.
I want to add some information. Well, I think thank you for the start. Everyone you know you have one oldest society in the Middle East, like the Brother of Purity. The name in Arab is Ikhwan as-Safa, secret society in the Muslim philosopher in Basra in Iraq between the 9th and the 10th century. The structure of the organization is and the identity member have never been clear. You can show that. They practice the esoteric, and the name is Ikhwan Safa, among the Ikhwan, the Pirchi, Ikhwan, the brother, and they have the letters between any brother, but the letters, the esoteric letters, in the form of poetry. And they have the main team, some painting, they explain more things. And they meet only 3 times in the month. So they study in every meeting astrology and many things. So it's the oldest like secret society. And they have the rank also, the craftsman, and the second political leader, third the knight, fourth the prophet and philosopher. So it's the oldest secret society in the Middle East, the Brethren of Purity. Yeah, just and they have a letter. You can see the encyclopedia of in the internet, the encyclopedia of the Brethren of Purity. Yeah.
The Brothers of Purity. Interesting. Yeah.
And where did they meet, please, Ishmael? Where was this?
The oldest in Basra in Iraq, in the
Okay.
19th and between the 19th and the 10th century. They practice philosophy, astrology, and many things. It was a very, very, very secret society.
Mm.
And I think they still exist in their council, showing the new Arabic and the Middle East Masonry, you know.
Mm.
And they meet 3 times on the month.
3 times a month.
Yeah.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah.
I think
that
sorry.
period, 8th, 9th, 10th century was in Iraq.
9th, 10th century.
Oh, the 19th century.
9th, 9 between
Oh, the
9
9th.
and 10th.
9.
9,
Yeah.
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 10th.
That was the height of
Yeah.
the Arabic.
Yeah, they have both. They have letters, the letters of the brother of purity.
Right.
Sure.
Right. Mm.
And
Fascinating. Yeah, fascinating.
Thank you very much, Ishmael. Brig, you've got your hand up again. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. David, Shane spoke of poetry as a medium of communicating esoteric ideas. I'm reminded of a very modern Welsh poet, deceased, Dylan Thomas, who in one of his most famous works, entitled Under Milk Wood, that was first publicly performed in the Carnegie Hall in at the USA, was asked by his American cast of actors and actresses, how do we say this, Mr. Thomas? What do we do with that, Mr. Thomas? And he gave them a simplistic direction in which he said, love the words. And I think here it is a cue, a direction for all of us. Poetry, music, art, all speaks to us in many different ways. And it's up to us to clear away the clutter of and the noise of our own materialistic existence and just be still and love the words.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you very much, Brig. And Boris, over to you. Thanks for your patience, Boris.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you, David, for a wonderful, provoking article. I think we all enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I will be honest with all of you. I'm a little bit puzzled. I'm not a big fan of Crowley, and I don't think this is going to be about him. And I was really surprised when I heard I was intrigued when I heard the title, because Wilmshurst, I've been following Blake, of course, Rumi, you mentioned, Shane, these are artists who used poetry, to explain light and to elevate and lift us further. And in my Masonic work, I wrote also poetry, nowhere coming, close to what we're discussing here. But I was really inspired to write poems, and I read them in an open lodge. So I just felt that was a way for me, kind of symbolically, to illustrate my own path instead of just using plain words, using symbols and using cues and these kind of things. But why I'm mentioning Crowley is that, for me, poetry elevates me. In Crowley's work, and again, I'm not talking about Crowley himself, but Crowley's poetry, which I think today is the topic, right? The fact that for me, again, I hope I'm not going to offend anybody here, but for me, and I researched him, I read his books, and I feel, for me, he's a master of I won't say black magic. That's going to be too simple, but he's in the black. While I believe what we are doing here, especially in the SRA and Freemasonry, is dealing with light, like the beautiful poem you mentioned, David. So I really find it interesting that somebody like Crowley would use poetry. It'll be as if, and again, I hope I'm not offending anybody, Oxford book would write, poetry of politicians. There'll be a Churchill poem and Mussolini poem. Yeah, both of them wrote poems, but clearly, and the fact that Oxford put both of them in one book, I really don't care, because, we here are not curated by Oxford, anybody. We're created by our own affinity. So I'm just really puzzled. And I'm definitely going to go and read Crowley's poetry, because I want to see whether in his poetry I'm feeling, whether he's elevating my vibration, which Rumi does, or he's putting me down. Thank you.
Yeah. That's fascinating, because that's one of the reasons why. Well, one of the reasons, small reason maybe, but why I wrote the paper, really, because I was not well. I was going to use the word shocked that Crowley was in there, really, and because even then he was viewed as being quite risque, quite controversial. But when I read one of his poems, I thought, oh, is this Crowley? Is this? And I'll read it again. Let's see, where are we now? Let's find it. Here we go. I feel the spring, the all-devouring dawn, rush with my rising. There beyond the goal, the veil is rent. Yes, let the veil be drawn. And that particular poem, I got the poems mixed up at first, and I had the Waite poem. I thought I was reading the Waite poem, and I thought, oh, well, that's quite good. And then I realized it was Crowley, and I thought, oh, I've got it mixed up. And then there's another one, into the darkness unafraid, where in soft hands of silence lay their veil of peace upon the blade of too bright thought we take our way. And again, if I hadn't mentioned the name Crowley, that poetry would be, no one would know. It's a beautiful part of a poem, and it's about moving from the darkness into the light. He was unafraid in the darkness, because he knew there would be light. He knew that something else was going to happen. It's all about initiation, and indeed one of his poems is about initiation into the golden dawn. So yeah, the sections of the poetry by Wilmshurst, Waite, and Crowley could almost be the same poem, and that's why I picked those particular verses, because they are describing initiation and this kind of movement away from darkness into light, and in particular, Wilmshurst and Waite's poetry, it's about finding that divine inside. And when you come to Crowley, it's a similar way. It's a similar message. So I found that quite unusual, and that those three writers, those three poets, were more or less writing about the same thing in a slightly different way, in a different tone, but it could have been the same poem, really. They were sharing similar themes, and so I think it was Brigg. Was it Brigg or Benny that mentioned about personal issues, personal life? Getting in the way of the message, and our preconceptions of these people, these messengers. So that's one thing that I wanted to kind of emphasize, really, in the paper.
Thank you.
That at this particular specific point, Wilmshurst, Waite, and Crowley were singing off the same page in a way, and I found that
clarified it
interesting.
so well. You clarified so well for me. I mean, it's amazing. I just realized it completely, that if you look at his own kind of path of Crowley himself, he kind of started in a more traditional Masonic path, and then went in his own weird way.
Yeah.
You can claim that you went all the way from Elena Blavatsky and Theosophy through anthropology, through then Tool Society to Hitler, or you went through Jesus is Christ, an early Christian message, all the way to killing witches and religious wars. But there's always like this kind of path. But so I thank you very much for actually highlighting that, I don't believe in dualism. I don't believe in black and white. I just believe in light and our inability to see light. So, maybe we see light, but then eventually we stop seeing it. So thank you very much for clarifying. That makes so much sense.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a bit like the allegory of the veil, because he mentions the veil as well. The veil is he's been initiated, and this veil is swept aside, and he sees everything. So it's the use of metaphors and again allegory. In Masonic ritual and initiation, the power of initiation and the power of the ritual and the poetry. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Boris. Good to see you. Brig, over to you again.
Thank you, Shane. Please forgive me, all people, for sharing this with you, because I do feel it's relevant to the discussion. Many years ago, I was initiated into a neo-pagan coven and spent a few years as a practicing pagan. And I was once asked by my earthly mentor what I understood by black magic. And I volunteered an opinion, and she said, "Oh, my dear, you've been reading too many Dennis Wheatleys." And when I asked her what she meant, she said, "Look, there are many of us," she said, "that are attracted to the dark side of the entities," she said, "that exist." She said, "but black magic is all about intent. Do you wish to create good, or do you wish to use these forces for evil? That is the difference between black and white magic." And I've never forgotten that. Okay, I was always attracted to what I deemed to be the white side, the positive side of the entities which we dealt with. But I think we do need to have a very clear distinction and understanding of what black and white magic is. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brig. And that's exactly what I mean by knowing which side our bread's buttered.
Thank you so much, Shane, for putting in a few words, which takes me half an hour. Bless you.
But isn't it the case though, Brig? It's a very good point you raise. So personally, regarding, and this is the only thing I would wish to say about Crowley, is that I have purposefully steered clear of Crowley for the simple reason that he took the ancient pagan saying, "Let it harm none, do what thou wilt," and omitted the first and most important part of that deep truth and principle, and by doing so set course for his ship, which led to a very, very dark place and a very selfish place, really. He got lost in his own ego. And I believe that by omitting the first part, it just showed willful tendency toward the negative, toward the dark.
If it do no harm, do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law.
Yeah, exactly. Let it harm none. That requires full consent. It requires full awareness of the consequences of our actions. And that's key, I believe.
Yeah, nobly put, Shane.
Thank you very much, Brig. And Yeah, Benny, over to you again.
Well, Shane, I have to correct you because it's actually not true that there is only this part, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, because the second part of the statement is love is the law, love under will. And the last part of it, love under will, it takes a lot of commentary to know exactly what is meant by that. But the fact is that the law is love. And I think therefore it's not really representative when you say that it's only about satisfying your own ego or something. I think this love under will has to do with being conscious in a way that you know. I once read a commentary about it. Some academic woman who made a wonderful commentary on this statement, but as there's no a negative statement in it. I think it's perfectly well.
I do, thank you, Benny. I do see your point, but I believe that by omitting the first part, let it harm none, that demonstrates a lack of understanding about the consequences and the potential destructive consequences of our actions. So to truly act in a way where we are aware that it will harm nothing or no one, that requires that we think deeply about the consequences of our actions. And I think that is the moral compass that's required to keep us acting in service to love rather than willful love. Because willful love sometimes can degenerate, as it did in his case, into expressions that I have no doubt harmed many.
But isn't it a natural part of spiritual development that your actions and your intentions are governed by truth and by divinity, that you're kind of aware, that you're not governed by your little ego if you're spiritual develop. And then I think it gives itself that if you're not governed by the small ego, that you're kind of guided by something higher, a higher spiritual truth. I don't think you could ever dream of harming anyone.
Well, yes, in principle, and yet in practice, I think that what was demonstrated was a very different experience in his case.
Okay.
Shane, if I can just jump in, sorry to jump in, but
Please do.
How Google going into profane fields had the first motto, which was don't be evil or do no evil. It was a very weird but esoteric logo for a corporation, but they changed it now to do the right thing. Does it mean that not being evil is not anymore a priority? Doing the right thing, who says something is right? So it's also the danger of changing a motto halfway, because it tells you like the fact that you need to change it. Like, what the hell do you mean? It used to be don't do evil. Now it's do the right thing.
Yes.
You mean the means justifies the goal justifies the means.
Thank you. On that note, I once saw an interview with Charles Manson, and he was saying very fiercely, very strongly, who are you to tell me that what I choose to do is evil? So in his mind, he judged himself to be innocent and his actions to be innocent and not evil. And yet he was the person that he was. He murdered people as he did and was totally unrepentant. I think there's a great danger in a lack of moral compass, especially when dealing with magical or mystical practices. The moral compass to understand the value of acting in service to a greater good, I think is the keynote, in my opinion.
You're absolutely right. If you look at the theory of neuro-linguistic programming, which I think, Shane, we might have mentioned once.
Yes.
Look at people like Robert Dilts, who has these kind of logical levels. And on the identity level, you have then values and beliefs. Not to go into this theory, but one could claim that even the worst, people like the one you mentioned, or even Hitler, Hitler was just, doing the right, that he felt, he was patriotic, but his beliefs were completely wrong. He felt that, the Jews are to blame, or the Slavs, or the Gypsies. So you can still have somebody having the right kind of, correct identity and even values correct, but the beliefs are that completely take them into a disaster. So
this for me is, thank you very much. This for me is exactly why let it harm none is so important, because if that's established right at the start, it means that you've thought things through properly.
It's the doing. It's the doing which cannot be harmful. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
because
it.
The doing is the result of the believing.
Yeah. But I mean, take the example of Hitler. I mean, there was no consideration for let it harm none there at all. And it could be said the same of any despot, any tyrant, tyrannical leader, any murderer, any rapist. They don't care about not harming. They do what they will. And that's the issue I have. That first part of that very, very wise saying was omitted. And for me, that saying, let it harm none, do what they will, I think is just profound. It's so simple and beautifully eloquent. It encapsulates everything, in my opinion. I align with that completely. Brig, over to you again. It's lovely, lively conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, Shane. Can I conclude this possibly? A comment on Crowley by saying to Boris and yourself and David, we look forward to your presentation on Crowley, Benny.
I dare say that there would be many people probably within the SRIA who would likely be very anti such a paper. So just to keep this in mind, I think it's important that I mention that. We have had a bit of an issue with a previous presentation, just in a minimal way, but there was concern expressed that it was giving airtime to somebody who was not deemed the right kind of person to be focusing the study group discussions upon. So I'll just mention that now. Over to you, Benny. You do have your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I just want to say that I'm in no way a follower of Crowley or OTO or anything. It just seemed to me that Crowley has been such a meaningful representative of some of the ideas, in the Golden Dawn, and he has been he has had a great capacity far beyond Charles Manson or any lunatic that you can mention. I could never believe that there would be any poems by Charles Manson in this anthology, and in many cases he was a great capacity. And that's the only thing I'm pointing to, and I'm in no way a follower of his teachings in any way. I strictly, confine myself to the white side of the force, and so that was just to put that right.
He did. Charles Manson did co-write a good song for the Beach Boys, believe it or not.
Okay.
Yeah, in the I think it was the very late 60s, and because it was one of the it was Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys that befriended Charles Manson, and ended up going around to his parties and things, but yeah, I think Manson he started off as like a musician, like a wannabe musician, and was touting his songs around Hollywood at one stage, and got involved with Terry Melcher. He was a producer. I think he was the son of Doris Day, Terry Melcher. I'm working off memory here, but yeah, it's actually quite a good song as well that the Beach Boys did. Dennis Wilson sang it. I can't remember the name of it now, but it's kind of Beach Boys compilation that I've got. But yeah, there's a good book out as well at the moment. We've completely gone off now on the tangent with Charles Manson. And this is, it's a great discussion this, but yeah, there's a good book out where again, I can't remember the author of the book, but it's about the CIA, and there's kind of loose evidence, shall we say, that Charles Manson was part of a project with the CIA, kind of brainwashing, in the late 60s with psychedelic drugs and things, and it's a fascinating book. Kind of leaves it open in the end, to what presents this kind of loose evidence and all this other stuff. But it's a great book. While we're on the subject of Charlie Manson,
I think there are even reports that Hitler wrote a poem or two, if I may say. Some of his autobiographers are claiming this. And I think as Shane was saying that, in esoteric and occult topics, so much is, of course, unknown, unproven. There's no room for science as yet. We mentioned quantum physics last time as a potential route into something, closing the gap. But there's so much, and I feel that what I like about what David was saying, that in Crowley you can really follow this, in my humble opinion, a deterioration, going from light into darkness. And for me, why I like Crowley in a way, why it's useful, why I have his books, it's a constant reminder that you can be manipulative. You can't, not that I am, but not to be, right? And if you look at most secret societies, most spiritual orders, including theosophists, which I love, by the way, if you look at history of big societies, which work over 100 years, is that always there's somebody who, it's either egocentric or it's money or it's power or anything, kind of starts creating a structure, starts manipulating, and this is a reminder that, we are working with light, we're working with love, with beauty, with energy, and we mustn't allow. So I love the way you explain, David, how, in his poetry, you can still see these kind of, light principles, but a constant reminder, his life story, that we are in very, very kind of sensitive territory. Even with this Zoom that we're doing, there are people who might not be initiated, there are people who are listening from the side. A lot of these, are Masonic, and again, people accusing Blavatsky for being inspiration for Hitler, right? I mean, how is that possible? That's, how the hell did they connect the dots? But if we leave these gates open, and if we spend time, as Shane was saying, researching these topics, I think we're going the wrong way. So we need to really stay. Let's do a Rumi session next time.
That would be wonderful, in my opinion. I think that would be wonderful. Yeah, just as a little quote here from William Blake. Where is it? The man who never alters his opinion is like standing water and breeds reptiles of the mind. What a lovely way of putting things. Reptiles of the mind.
Very good. Very
Yeah.
good.
That's one thing I think about this type of a discussion in a study group like this, is that we help each other to not have fixed opinions. You know, we're working out the great mysteries of life together, you know, helping each other to understand the great mysteries of life.
Shane, I'm really inspired. Sorry, I'm jumping in like this. I tend to be
Please
more.
go ahead. This is wonderful.
But you mentioned Blake and his own kind of, dark thoughts and maybe even, depression. For me, depression is one thing and manipulation is another.
Yes, I agree.
You can be digging in the darkness of your soul and kind of ripping yourself apart and trying to, control your demons. This is what, this whole work is about.
Yes.
Once you master the black force and you start manipulating people, then you go into dangerous territory. So I love Blake's pessimism and playing in the darkness, but that's completely a different motive for me. Thank you.
I completely agree with you. Yeah. And yeah, feel free, just speak whenever whenever the spirit takes you. David, do you have anything you'd like to comment on, anything we've just been speaking about?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with most of it. Yeah, yeah, it's been a fascinating discussion. Yeah, I'd like to add one little thing, and this is in the book. When I received the book, it's got a little inscription by someone from Christmas 1995. So it reads, "My dearest darling Nikki, with you I have learnt that it is more important to understand the questions than to know all the answers. With all my love and affection, always, Philip." No idea who Nick and Philip are, but
yeah, bless them.
Beautiful line there.
Yeah.
More important to understand the questions than to know all the answers. And I think that's what we've been doing today. Really, we've been in our discussions,
yeah,
and obviously it's part of that, the history, the journey of that particular edition, that particular book. And
yeah,
so it's interesting that we're still doing that
yeah,
in discussing the book today.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, David. That's really lovely. Boris, over to you.
That was just a clap.
Oh, okay. I can see the difference now. Yeah, anybody else before we maybe bring the meeting to a close today? Feel free. Now's the time. Okay, well, David, on behalf of the Metropolitan Study Group of the SRIA, I'm just going to change the view for the sake of the recording here. I'd like to thank you very, very much, David, for your presentation today and for the wonderful discussion. Thanks to every one of you who's taken the time to join us here today. And the success of these meetings is we are the sum of our parts. And I feel that we are truly blessed to meet in this way and to have these discussions and share with each other in the ways that we do. There's a lot of love in these meetings, and long may this grow and blossom and prosper. So on behalf of the Metropolitan Study Group of the SRIA, Dr. David, I wish you a wonderful weekend. Have a great time with your family.
Thank you.
Thanks ever so much.
Thank you for the opportunity again. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to.
You're most welcome, sir. And love to you all. Have a wonderful weekend. And we look forward to seeing you again next month.